The year is 1250. Somewhere in the South Pacific, it's night. A double-hulled canoe cuts through waves the size of houses, 60 feet of lashed wood, carrying 30 people into the unknown. No compass, no maps, no metal tools. Just one man staring at the stars, reading an ocean that wants them dead. They have been sailing for 3 weeks straight without seeing land. Behind them stretches 1,400 miles of empty ocean. Ahead, nothing but endless horizon and the faint hope that somewhere out there, an island exists. They are searching for a target the size of a shopping mall in an ocean larger than all of Earth's continents combined. If they miss their target by just 5 miles, they sail into oblivion and never come back. There is no margin for error, no second chances, and no rescue. This is the most dangerous migration in human history, and they are attempting it in wooden canoes held together with rope. This is the story of the Austronesian migration. Scattered across this vast blue pond sit over 20,000 islands. Most of them tiny specks, many uninhabited, some barely rocks breaking the surface. Others are big chunks of land capable of holding societies. Finding them hundreds and thousands of years ago is like locating specific grains of sand scattered across an entire continent. But that's exactly what the Austronesian people accomplished. And they didn't do it once. They probably did it hundreds of times over 3,000 years. Systematically exploring and colonizing the largest ocean on Earth, using nothing but wooden boats and human persistence. It starts in today's Taiwan around 3,500 to 3000 BC, with Neolithic rice and millet farmers living on an island off the coast of China. They speak an early Austronesian language that will eventually spawn around 1,250 descendant languages across half the globe. But what did they leave? The exact mix of motives is debated. Opportunity, trade networks, social pressures, and sometimes local scarcity all probably played roles. But the decision that changed human history was the same. They chose to sail into the unknown rather than fight forever over the known. Some of their boats are absolute masterpieces of pre-metal engineering. Picture 2 parallel hulls, often dugouts built up with planks lashed together with coconut fiber sennit. Between them sits a sturdy platform for cargo, people, and supplies. Rising above everything else is a crab claw sail, a triangular mat sail held by 2 spars, traditionally woven from pandanus leaves. On the biggest ocean-going canoes, the total length can reach around 50 to 60 feet, about 15 to 18 meters, and all of it built without metal nails. The structure is held together with lashings, wooden pegs or dowels, and joinery, an entire system perfected and passed down through many generations. The twin hull design is revolutionary because it creates stability through width. Instead of one hull boat, depending on a deep keel or heavy ballast, the canoe stays steady because the hulls are spaced apart. That lets each hull be long and narrow, which also cuts drag and boosts speed. The crab claw sail represents another stroke of human genius. It can be tilted and rotated to stay efficient across a wide range of wind angles. But here's what makes these vessels truly great. On the largest voyaging canoes, crews could carry dozens of people, plus food and water, and sometimes animal and plant cuttings, for voyages lasting many days or even weeks across hundreds of thousands of miles of open ocean. They were essentially floating settlements, built to explore, last, and potentially arrive with everything needed to start life on a new shore. But how did they travel? This had to be more than guessing. These people were running a system, carefully exploring ocean patches back and forth, missing by a few miles, and a group will never reach land again. To lower the chances of getting lost and to be able to achieve such journeys, we can assume the knowledge was based on multiple layers of signals that cross-checked each other, clues, bits, and pieces that once put together gave them a chance. All night, every night, through generations, they developed skills. Probably, the navigators memorized entire sky charts, learning the rising and setting positions of hundreds of stars. They divided the horizon into multiple segments, creating a mental compass where each segment corresponded to specific star paths. In the far north of the Pacific, Polaris Hokupa'a could help anchor direction and latitude across much of the region. Navigators would have relied on other star paths, with the Southern Cross helping orient the southern sky, and as one star set below the horizon, another rose to replace it, creating an unbroken chain of celestial guideposts throughout the night. But stars only work when the sky is clear. What happens when clouds roll in? These navigators learned to read cloud formations with the same precision they read stars. Clouds hanging stationary over islands form distinctive patterns, and lagoons reflect light onto the undersides of clouds, creating a greenish tint visible from far away. For example, high volcanic islands generate their own weather systems, so a stationary cloud in an otherwise empty ocean means land sits directly beneath it. Stars and the sky hold very valuable information, but the ocean was the real test. Ocean swells became another tool. Swells move in remarkably consistent patterns for days at a time, and islands disrupt these patterns in predictable ways. Islands create zones of calmer water in their lee, and they also reflect and refract waves and currents. When reflected swells meet incoming swells, they create interference patterns that a very skilled navigator could feel through the hull of a canoe, sometimes hinting at land tens of kilometers away before anyone else can see it. Birds provided yet another layer of navigational data. White terns and noddy terns fly out to sea at dawn to hunt fish, then return to land at dusk. Navigators learn to sail toward land when seeing birds flying away from land in the morning, and to follow birds heading toward land in the evening. Large, consistent movements often meant land was likely not far away. Another example is seasonal migratory birds. In some island traditions, the timing and direction of certain migrations became one more clue in a bigger pattern. Though these signals are harder to prove directly than stars or swells, and they varied from region to region. Besides these, they would have stacked dozens more signals on top. Birds, temperature shifts, drift lines, reef glow, even the way waves bend around unseen land. Not one clue, a whole instrument panel. This wasn't luck or intuition. This was rigorous knowledge learned over generations, memorized through songs and chants, passed from master to apprentice in an oral tradition where one mistake could have meant death. As their journey starts from today's Taiwan, they don't cross an ocean in one heroic leap at first. They build a chain. Each new island becomes a staging base, a place to plant gardens, repair canoes, raise children, stockpile food, and train the next generation of navigators. From that base, scouts probe the horizon, then return with knowledge, and only later do families follow. So the map expands like a heartbeat. Explore, return, prepare, migrate, repeat. And every time the circle of known sea grows, the next jump becomes possible. From Taiwan, they begin island hopping south, reaching the northern Philippines by around 2200 to 2000 BC, and spreading through the Philippines and island Southeast Asia over the next millennium. Then, something extraordinary happens that will shape the future of half the planet. They split. One group heads west across the Indian Ocean in one of history's most audacious voyages, eventually reaching Madagascar off the coast of Africa in the first millennium AD. The other group heads east into the Pacific, sailing into an ocean so vast and empty that it defies comprehension. Most researchers agree Madagascar was first permanently settled in the mid-1st millennium AD, roughly somewhere between 500 to 700, by Austronesian-speaking seafarers from Southeast Asia, later joined by migrants from East Africa. The Malagasy language is Austronesian, and its closest deep relatives sit in the Barito language group of southern Borneo, with strong Malay influence in seafaring and trade vocabulary like the fingerprints of a maritime crew. How did they get there? The exact route is debated, but the reality of it makes sense. If you sail west out of Indonesia at the right season, the monsoon winds and the south equatorial current can push you across the Indian Ocean toward Africa, and Madagascar sits right in that path. Some scenarios propose a mostly direct crossing, others involve stopovers through parts of the western Indian Ocean, linked to wider trade networks. Either way, this wasn't an accidental drift. It looks like purposeful ocean travel with people, crops, and language arriving together. Back in the Western Pacific, more than 2,000 years prior, their Lapita-era descendants appear in the Bismarck archipelago by the late 2nd millennium BC. And from there, the expansion into remote Oceania accelerates. By roughly 1,200 to 1,000 BC, they've crossed into what's called Remote Oceania, islands beyond the range of simple watercraft, requiring sophisticated navigation and multi-day voyages. They settle Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa, with each jump growing longer and each voyage becoming more dangerous than the last. Then, mysteriously, they pause. It's considered that for nearly 1,000 years, the eastward expansion slows dramatically. Nobody knows exactly why. There are theories. However, people were still voyaging, trading, intermarrying, and refining the technology. But the edge of the map held unchanged. But around the year 1000, something triggers a second wave of exploration that makes the first look small by comparison. They start moving again. Moving east, and in the 11th or 12th century, they reach the Society Islands, and possibly as far as Gambier. Then, after a short interval between 1190 and 1290, they spread in one major pulse to the remaining islands of East Polynesia, in the Cook Islands, the Marquesas, Hawaii, and New Zealand. And then, in perhaps the single most audacious voyage in human history, they sail across the biggest emptiness on Earth to find Easter Island. Easter Island sits around 2,200 miles west of Chile, and about 1,200 miles from the nearest inhabited island, Pitcairn. It's a triangular piece of land measuring just 63 square miles. Finding it isn't just difficult, it seems statistically absurd. Yet, it's believed that in the 1200s, Polynesian navigators from the Mangareva Gambier region and/or the Marquesas sailed into the void and found it. One proposed approach is latitude sailing. Sail to a specific latitude upwind of a target zone, then turn and let the wind carry you across, sweeping the area like a search grid, and if they miss their target, the prevailing winds could still push them back towards known islands. It was risk management through navigation geometry, turning an impossible task into merely incredibly dangerous. But these explorers didn't just discover these islands, they settle them. Sometimes that means return voyages, multiple trips back and forth, bringing entire families along with livestock, agricultural plants, and tools. A one-way drift voyage would be impressive, but a deliberate round-trip voyage is even more impressive. And they did it again and again over centuries. They brought their entire civilization with them in those wooden hulls. Multiple voyages carried taro, breadfruit, coconuts, bananas, and other plants, the agricultural foundation of Polynesian life. They transported paper mulberry for making cloth, chickens for food and feathers, and in some islands, pigs and dogs as well, along with the Polynesian rat, which traveled widely with people. This practice is called transported landscapes. You don't just discover a new island, you transform it into home. But how do we know this? Genetic work on paper mulberry across the Pacific links key remote Oceania lineages back to Taiwan, consistent with deliberate, repeated transport as part of organized trips over generations. But why risk everything on a voyage that could easily end in death? And in some cases, it probably ended that way. The most basic answer is resource scarcity. Small islands can only support small populations, and when those resources run low, your options narrow dramatically. Competition intensifies, conflict could erupt, and suddenly, younger sons and daughters, landless families, or ambitious leaders start looking towards the horizon where new land means new opportunity. But it wasn't just survival driving them. Polynesian oral traditions speak of legendary navigators motivated by mana, spiritual authority, and personal prestige. Discovering new land brought glory that echoed through generations. Settling it brought power and the chance to establish new societies free of old hierarchies. Possibly, some migrations were carefully planned missions, while others were desperate escapes from famine or warfare. Some may have been political exiles, defeated chiefs seeking new territories where they could go. This, mixed with the curiosity that drove our species to constantly migrate from one place to another, set the base for these actions. The specific motivations varied from voyage to voyage, but the result remained constant. Humanity's largest geographic expansion across the most challenging environment on Earth. But how do we know this was not just random drifting on ocean currents? If it was luck, the Pacific would look like a mess of accidents. It doesn't. It looks like a plan. The evidence comes from multiple scientific disciplines, and it's overwhelming. The Polynesian languages are a branch of the Austronesian family, creating a linguistic family tree that broadly mirrors the migration. For example, the word for canoe in Maori is waka. In Hawaiian, it's wa'a. In Tahitian, it's va'a. In Samoan, it's va'a. Same root, same origin, separated by thousands of miles and centuries of divergence. Mitochondrial DNA, which passes through mothers, shows that Polynesian mtDNA is overwhelmingly Asian in origin, about 93.8% Asian haplogroups in one major study. Y chromosome DNA, which passes through fathers, shows a much higher Melanesian contribution, about 65.8% Melanesian Y chromosome haplogroups. This isn't random mixing. It's a pattern signature that indicates systematic interaction during the passage. Lapita pottery, distinctive ceramics decorated with intricate stamped patterns, appears in the Bismarck Archipelago in the late 2nd millennium BC, then spreads eastward across the Pacific in a clear sequence. This is the archaeological signature of a culture on the move. Paper mulberry plants and other commensal species that traveled with people track human movement across islands, species that cannot cross vast oceans independently. The genetic evidence shows they were carried intentionally as part of organized colonization efforts. Modern researchers have also modeled Pacific voyaging with winds, currents, and island targets, and drift-only scenarios are a poor fit for the overall settlement pattern, especially if you want sustained back-and-forth voyaging and reliable landfalls on small targets. Let's put this accomplishment in proper perspective. By around 1300, Polynesians had successfully settled the far habitable islands of East Polynesia, one of the last major human expansions into previously uninhabited lands. The distance from Madagascar in the west to Easter Island in the east spans roughly 9,000 miles, or about 14,300 kilometers. From Hawaii in the north to New Zealand in the south stretches another 4,400 miles, which is about 7,100 kilometers of open water. They accomplished all of this without writing systems to record their knowledge, without compasses or nautical charts to guide their way. They worked with wood, stone, fiber rope, and accumulated knowledge of generations transmitted through oral tradition. While many sailors elsewhere in the world still tended to hug coasts, Polynesian navigators were capable of multi-week crossings of open ocean. Consider the comparison. European voyages to the Americas, like Columbus's, covered roughly 3,000 miles across Atlantic routes, using big ships, magnetic compasses, and nautical charts developed over centuries of European seafaring. The Polynesian voyage to Easter Island covered around 2,000 miles across largely uncharted ocean using wooden canoes lashed together with rope and navigation based on star knowledge and wave reading. By the time Columbus set sail in 1492, Polynesians had already settled some of the most remote habitable islands on Earth, and they'd done it centuries earlier. For centuries after European contact, this navigational knowledge declined in many places. Colonization disrupted traditional training networks. Missionary activity and new political boundaries often weakened institutions that had maintained wayfinding, and modern technology made traditional navigation seem obsolete. By the mid-20th century, some influential writers argued that long-distance settlement must have been accidental drift because intentional navigation seemed impossible without instruments. So Pacific Islanders decided to prove the skeptics wrong through direct demonstration. In 1975, they built the Hokulea, a 62-foot double-hulled voyaging canoe based on traditional designs built with modern materials. In 1976, the voyage began. Hawaii to Tahiti, across 2,700 miles across open ocean. No compass, no sextant, no GPS, no nautical charts. Navigator Mau Pialiug from Micronesia led the expedition using only traditional wayfinding methods, star paths, wave patterns, bird behavior, and centuries-old knowledge. 34 days later, they entered Tahiti after about 2,700 miles at sea. The ancient knowledge wasn't myth or exaggeration. It was rigorous, reliable, and demonstrably effective. Since that landmark voyage, traditional voyaging canoes have sailed across the Pacific many times, training new generations in the ancient arts and proving repeatedly that you don't need modern technology to cross oceans. You just need knowledge, skill, and courage. The Austronesian expansion represents one of the largest human expansions in history before the modern era, covering more distance than any other prehistoric culture managed to achieve. From Madagascar to Easter Island spans roughly 9,000 miles, and they traversed it using wooden boats and navigation systems preserved in oral tradition. While other civilizations were building cities and empires, the Polynesians were building something even more remarkable: a maritime empire where domain wasn't measured in acres of land, but in millions of square miles of ocean. Their territory stretched across half the planet, connected not by roads, but by ocean currents and star paths. Today, over 300 million people speak Austronesian languages, and the family includes roughly 1,250 languages, from Madagascar to Chile, from Taiwan to New Zealand. One linguistic ancestry connects hundreds of diverse cultures, all descendants of those first voyagers who looked at an empty horizon and saw possibility instead of fear. These were people who built boats from trees and crossed oceans as casually as others crossed rivers, who memorized the night sky so completely they could navigate by stars that wouldn't rise above the horizon for hours, who read waves and birds and clouds like we read street signs, who risked everything, their lives, their families, their futures, for the chance to find new land. And they found it. Not once or twice, but across thousands of miles over centuries of continuous exploration. Since we started this channel, we have been obsessed with historical maps. Since some of you might like maps as well, we created a few products for you. high-resolution downloads, and museum-quality prints. Go to knowledgia.co and have a look. If you want to own one, use my code in the description below.